The Sinai is a desert in Egypt, about a third the size of Florida. There, an ambitious project is underway to regreen it. The project consists of three parts. One is to rehabilitate Lake Bardawil at the northern tip of the Sinai. Two is to actually regreen the Sinai, and there they will do this by using the sediment from the Lake Bardawil after they've rehabilitated that. And three, they hope to shift the wind patterns over the Sinai because of the regreening efforts, which then affects evapotranspiration, which affects the water cycles, and which will then bring more rain to that area and also to neighboring areas. I'm here today with Tish van der Hoeven, and he's working on a project to regreen the Sinai. So welcome, Tish.
Yeah, thanks, man. Nice having me.
Great to have you.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about how you got into this project to regreen the Sinai, or a little bit about your background?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the background. Yeah, no, I did coastal morphology. So when you're from the Netherlands, and when you have parents that sail, you get in very quickly. You come into the dredging world. In other words, the Dutch is being dredged. Lots of the land is reclaimed already from the 11th century. So playing with sand is a little bit in our DNA. And it was actually my grandfather that advised me to pick that that direction. And I started to study it, and I loved it. And I did coastal morphology. So that's really the sand transport in estuaries and lagoons and etc. So I started to work again with now I think it's the biggest dredging contractor in the world is Belgium. It's close to like you got two Belgium, two Dutch, Van Oort, Boskalis, Jan de Nul, and Dredging International. And I loved it to work in a mixed culture area. So that's why I started to work with the Belgians. And I love the Belgians in that sense. It's always funny because normally you would say that the Dutch are good at innovating and the Belgians are good at optimizing. At a certain moment, I got a call. It was 19 January 2016 from the formal project manager of the Suez Canal from our dredging company. And he said to me, please listen, I got on this farewell party of the Suez. I got this official from the Egyptian government coming up to me and starting to talk to me about the Arabic Spring and all the sad thing that was happening or happened in the Middle East. And that they were searching to do something positive back to the Bedouin people in the North Sinai, and that the fish was disappearing. And if a dredging company didn't know any solution how the fish could come back. And via I was known within the company to come up with alternative designs. Malik Boekebush, I'm still humble that he called me that day. He called me up. He said, please listen, they said I have to call you, and he started to talk about this lagoon, and it was salt, and I said, oh, okay. So does it have inlets? Yeah, I know it has inlets. So right, man, let's open up the door. And he said, okay, dude, if you think you know what you want to do, I'll give you a bit of internal budget and go for it. Yeah, and from that day on, the Sinai never went out of my life. So we started to very quickly model it, and as being a morphologist, I'm used to calculate, engineer with natural systems. So natural system is pretty common for me. And tidal prism, so the water that goes in and out the lagoon when a tidal wave passes the coast. Yeah, that's me. So we very quickly started to set up some numerical models and just got the feeling what we could do with this lagoon. And then I never forget, you got this right-winged Dutch political guy shouting that a refugee would cost the Dutch government 53,000 euros a year. And they are normally always saying, no, we should help the people in their own country, blah, 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 blah. And with other words, don't take care of the refugees. And I was like, oh, fuck you, I get you there, man. We got 53,000 euros. If I can achieve a fisher job over there, the man will not flee. So Europe, you're going to pay for that. So then it started to buzz a little bit how to holistically start building up such a business plan. But it happened the same with the fish, right? So whether we went from algae to mullets to sea bass to sole, and I wasn't at all an ecologist, but I realized that the basic principles of ecology are, man, they look so much common to how to design a breakwater. It's all with semi-ferric formulas, with data, with interpretations, finding the relations, etc. So very quickly we were able to build a model or a process model based upon a numerical model, and it was crazy. I was like, what the hell? Why don't we do this all over the planet? And then, of course, we started. We had some support from University of Wageningen and some aquatic people, and in principle, they said, "These, in principle, you're right, but if you want to follow the rules of ecology, you have to start setting up these complex models and blah blah blah." I said, "Yeah, no, leave the models. They're way too complex, and I'm not yet on that level." So started to create, together with Malik, a bit of a business plan around it.
I want just to step back just to give the larger picture. So you started out with this project to regreen the Sinai.
Now the larger picture comes. Now the larger picture comes.
Okay, cool.
Give me 1 second, because then we realized by doing it, it was not only opening the door, but it was dredging tidal gullies. And the moment we started to do that, I was touching the subka soils. And the subka soils, if you're from the Netherlands, you know that marine sediments are very fertile the moment you have flushed them, because that's why the Netherlands is such a big agricultural producer. So what we started to realize, wait a minute, if we dredge those soils, we're not going to throw them away because that costs a lot to dump them offshore. We're going to start using to regreen them. And of course, by saying it, we started to look from the lagoon way more into the desert. And you see all of these dried up rivers from Google Earth. And then just as an engineer, I was like, wait a minute, okay, so if we can use these sediments, we will be able to get the salt out of it. It are the organics that are required to grow the plants. It are the organics that naturally manage the water. So what we need to do, we need to use those sediments to start regreening. And then somebody came into me. It was actually it's a long side story. I won't tell too much about it. It was a client of me that who gave me a bit of time to work on it. And he said to me, "I will come every Tuesday night at your place." And so I was working with the sediments and thinking about regreening, creating microclimates, cooling the air, creating a little bit of a water cycle. And he came up to me and he showed me the Green Gold documentary of John Liu. And first of all, I didn't want to see it. Like, dude, I'm too busy. I got to do this. But a friend of mine put it on at night, and I watched it for 35 times in a row. And it's John Liu saying at a certain moment, or first Jeff Lawton, what we need to do remains relatively simple. It's just hard work. And it was John Liu that said, if we can restore large-scale damaged ecosystems, why don't we fucking do it? And I'm like, wait a minute. Because when I started to look at the Luz Plateau, man, those amounts of soils are peanuts for the dredging industry. We can do this large scale. So why the fuck are we not doing it? Why don't we change the purpose of our industry and start to do it? So when I saw that documentary later on, and I'm not a writer, I started to make drawings. Very practical.
Yeah, I just want to step back just a little bit. So the lowest plain is actually a desert area in China that's about the size of Belgium, and so the Chinese regreened it, and John Liu
it's already the size of France.
Did a documentary, of the whole process. And then the Sinai is a bit smaller than Belgium, right? It's about maybe the third the size of Florida, I think.
Yeah, it's 35,000 square kilometers, which flows into the Mediterranean.
Okay, yeah. And just to give a little bit of the geography, so the Sinai is on the northern east end of Africa, and then it kind of joins into the the western part of Asia and the Middle East there.
Yeah,
So
it's really the tectonic plate which was attached to Africa when Africa was drifting towards Euro-Asia. It was the Levant tectonic plate, which partly is Lebanon now, and partly is that Sinai that really bounced into Eurasia. So it's really the bridge from Africa to Asia. Absolutely. Yeah.
and right now it's mainly just desert, just sand, and with a kind of lake at the northern tip, right? And that's the thing you're beginning to dredge or looking at how you restore that lake, and then take that lake stuff, the sediment, and put it onto the sands of the Sinai to regreen it. Is that?
Yeah, so it's if you so that bridge area of the Sinai Peninsula is 60,000 square kilometers in size, and on the northern part, roughly 35,000 square kilometers is flowing to the Mediterranean, and there you get from Israel to the Nile, actually, to the Nile Delta, and there you used to have the Suez Canal, or you still have the Suez Canal, of course. And Bardawil is really on the western, it's on the eastern side of the Suez Canal, so on the western side, west-north of the Sinai Peninsula. Yeah, and it's completely barren rock. So she most likely turned in between 7,000 to 4,000 years before Christ. That's when she really became a desert for the last time, because she was green and became a desert quite a lot of times in history. And now she's very barren. In the highlands of our watershed, there's maybe 20 to 30 millimeters of rain, which normally actually falls in a flash flood, like every couple of years. And the coastal areas do have more rain. It's like 100 to sometimes 200 millimeters, depends on where you are. And it's a very, very barren place, because actually all the real soils have been flushed away, and many of these soils ended up into the lagoon. So what you see there is that the lagoon used to be 20 to 40 meters deep, 600 square kilometers in size, and now is only 1.3 meters deep on average. And if you would drill a core into it, the first 5 to 10 meters, depending on where you are, will be the subka soils, so very mineral and nutrient rich, silty clay, sometimes 40% clay sediments. And underneath there's another 10 to 30 meters of sandy sand. And that's actually sand coming from the Mediterranean. And the subkas are really the eroded soils. I normally call them the indigenous soils. From the old vegetation cover of the Sinai Peninsula. So there you see the whole Sinai Peninsula reaching from the Nile Delta all the way up to the Dead Sea. So the whole Levant tectonic plate reaches further up there, up north, and goes all the way down, right? And here you can see that very sharp white edge, which is really the wind erosion when the wind falls from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea. And here she's highlighted what we're doing. The main city there is El Arish, and this is Bardawil. And if I would show you, so here you get a little bit of a view of Bardawil itself, where you currently have two inlets. And again, it's as being an engineer, we like to hindcast our calculations. So this is the lagoon currently as she is, with the two manipulated, dredged inlets already from the 1920s. So it's one on the eastern side and one on the midwestern side. And there you get the full area. You can see that she's very, very shallow as we speak. The current inlets are actually dredged there in 2019, a bit inspired on the work. And here you get a kind of a plan view with a cross section. What I'm just trying to explain to you is that you got the top layers of the subka approximately 5 to 10 meters deep, and you got the beach sandy soils, which lots of shells coming from the Mediterranean. And just to get you a rough idea of numbers, the subka soils are approximately 2.5 billion cubic meters in volume, and are ranging in organic matters from 3 to up to 15%. So they're very high on organic matter. But there are many other nutrients. What we actually see is that the real nutrient missing is phosphor, but it's still a bit into.
And so we're gonna so when you spread this sediment up onto the
you don't spread it.
Kind of the slope. Which is the
You
main?
don't spread it on the slope. You don't spread it on the slope. Wait, let me double check it. Now, what we did together with for the people who don't know him, Google John Todd. He's one of my, normally I call him one of my Jedis, but he's an amazing ecological pioneer. There you go. The man standing here on the right. And he started already in the hippie times. And he created the eco machine. And there you can see all of his work. And he actually started to create aquatic food webs to purify water, but also sediments, ranging from ecologically disordered water up to heavy chemical pollutions. And it's really bizarre what the man does. And he purifies water with photosynthesis. So he actually purifies the water and he builds biodiversity. It's really amazing what he did. And John Liu got me into contact with him. I think I met him in 2017 in October, and since then, he's one of my close friends.
Yeah, I've seen some of these tanks, these sequence of tanks. So you kind of clean the wastewater by putting it through a whole sequence of biologically filled.
But what he does goes further. Like many of us are used. I used to be the same. Is that you design something because you want to get something out of the system you build. That's not what he does. He builds functional ecosystems. So he builds an environment a functional ecosystem can build herself. And you don't ask, you don't design nature. You let nature design herself, and she will give you whatever she wants to give. And it's really, the man is mind-blowing if you speak to him. And he came up with this very easy concept. When I took him over in November 2017, we set up a convention with Li Rei, that's the guy who did the Lust Plateau in China, with Tim Flannery, John Liu, John Todd, Daniel Halsey, many of the different people that got attached to the project. And John Todd came up with this very easy system. And he said, man, you get salt and you get marine sediments. So what you need to do is you need to start building an aquatic food web which can feed the people, put a geodesic dome on top of it, and in the morning you tap it and it will rain. It's just what, of course, the normal function of water is in an ecosystem. But it will educate the people. The rain will fall, will infiltrate in the soils, and that can grow then trees, deep enough roots, and after a while you can change it. I said, John, I'm loving it, but I'm an engineer. Let us start working together. Let me create a calculation method behind your intuition, but let me then edit and scale it up. And that's what we started to do.
So those geodesic domes that we just saw, those are what you put on the Sinai, right? And then the water in them?
Wait. This is where the idea started with John Todd. Okay. And John Todd was actually, you have to move them every 2.5 years. And I said, I'm loving it, but this is not what I can use as a scale up towards my dredging industry. So what I'm started to do together with John Todd, build first in the window, then on a farm. So we started to scale up as eco-oases, started to calculate how much water can we produce, how can we ecologically order the water with an aquatic ecosystem so it fertilizes and let the plants grow much quicker. What actually kind of halophytes do we need to select and use to grow on the subcat soils? And how can we trigger the diatoms, which are the crucial algae there in the beginning for the fish, to grow them? And that's what we started to do. And this ended up now here on the laboratory, which I have, it's just 500 meters away from where I am right now, and where we build a geodesic dome inspired by John Todd, but with John Todd together also upgraded with a soil basin underneath. And this is actually a laboratory, or I call it a physical model test, because I'm an engineer and I don't need to understand everything. I need to be able to predict everything. And what we do here is with all different habitats and with different aquatic feed trains, we can build ecological function in the combination of an atmosphere, a land, and an aquatic ecosystem. So it's kind of an incubator, what you need to do outside. And this we scaled up to a principal farm of 17 hectares. So we build it on a farm, one single farmer level, how you can use marine sediments step by step with the geodesic dome, produce fresh water, have different trains of salinity in it, and upgrade your marine sediments by plant ecological succession towards fresh sediments and plants, which you can then replant outside. So what we created, this is on a farmer level, but we got a 17-hectare one, which is a little bit more industrialized, where you can produce many, many different types of plant species attached to livable soils.
Wait, in 17 hectares, is that all covered by this geodesic dome or not?
No, only a part of it. Because what the geodesic dome does, she produces fresh water, and the fresh water and the water vapor protects the algae to grow in the tanks. So you have, you got to realize you got like the first part is really aquatic and atmospheric. So you produce water, you produce fish, and like an aquaponic, where you also produce the fish food. And the aquaponic becomes the fertilizer of your marine sediments. And the marine sediments you dredge, they're very salt. And step by step, with back currents, you're going to desalinate the soils with different types of plant vegetation growing there. So you start from halophytes, you go to grasses, you go to potatoes, you end up with trees or whatever plants you need. And with it, you produce fish, seaweeds, etc. So you produce a very diverse food pattern for the people working there. And step by step, you upgrading the marine sediments towards the indigenous soils they used to be, towards the fresh biospheres you can start replanting. And this is how we're going to do it, most likely on a larger scale. And what we then do, I don't know if I have it here. Let me double check. Yeah, here. This is actually the one I'm currently building in the Sinai together with Hoeven. This is the whole process. So how you can start dredging the soils from the lagoon, transport them hydraulically, stockpiling them in big segregation ponds where you can already start determining the different minerals and nutrient loadings you would like to have. So that's where you do the soil engineering. And you go from halophytes to grass crop trees, how to upgrade these soils by producing the food, and how you can do it.
So I'm just trying to understand where the soil goes. Does the soil go into these glass tanks, or does it spread onto the ground? And then the ground is covered by a geodesic dome?
No. You have here what you see, you have your geodesic domes with your aquatic tanks in there, right? And you have large slip fields. I don't have the farm level in here, but you have large slip field segregation ponds where you build like most likely what we now think is 30 to 50 centimeters of segregated settled soils, marine sediments. And that's where you start to grow halophytes, increase the permeability, have the soil biocompacted, and step by step have the different plants on it. And
well, I'm just sorry, where does the soil go? Is it go in the tanks, or does it go in the ground of the geodesic?
Segregation ponds. So you have to see really levees here. So this is also another design, but this is, so take the tanks out of it. So but it's also with the dome. So you get misjudged. I don't have it here. They're just
okay. So it's spread out on the floor of the dome. Yeah. Okay, got it.
Yeah, but not in the dome. Huh?
Oh, it's outside the dome.
Yes, in the larger farms. So mainly the community farms. That's where it's outside, and you have shade nets on top of it because the domes are way too expensive.
Okay.
And it just costs too much material. And what we actually then going to do, so you're going to see like out of your 17-hectare pilot farm, which we're currently designing to start building there, hopefully soon, because we signed the contract. Is from the 17 hectares, approximately 2 hectares are geodesic domes with aquatic food webs in it of different salinity levels. So there you have algae, mussels, fish. And from the fish, that water goes to your silt basins outside. So where you have your marine sediments in thin layers. covered with shade nets and have the plants grow. And you flush the soils with the water coming from the aquatic tanks. And you do that step by step because you want to desalinate it. But the problem is if you start desalinating it, you also flush out the nutrients. But then the desalinated water, so a little bit of salty water with the nutrients, flow back again to the aquatic tanks, so where they can grow algae. So it's a complete cycled system where we don't lose anything. Now, it goes further because here you see the first Magara mountain, which is approximately 50 kilometers down south of Bardawil. And there you can see all the old river valleys. And what we're going to do is if you dredge materials, these are like the big machines, right? And the moment you have the material dredged in a suspension, you don't want to let it settle down again because then it costs, again, quite a lot of energy. So what we're currently designing, and again, it's not up to me to decide if the world wants to do this. It's up to me to come up with an engineering solution how you can do it. So later on, we can all think if we want to do it. But now the whole concept is if we dredge it, we hydraulically transport it is by far the cheapest way to transport a sand over a larger system. You're going to hydraulically transport it into the mountain ranges. And into the mountain ranges, you create large stockpiles where you can stockpile the marine sediments and have the use the aquatic trains, what I just showed you, to harvest the phosphor out of the seawater. You will transport it in low densities to reduce the damage on your pipelines. And there you will have big sediment basins high up in your mountains. And there you let the sun evaporate the salt water a little bit further to increase her density. Now you got to understand that the footprint of salt water, of water vapor is very important because salt water requires more energy to evaporate, but she has a lower cloud condensation level. So using salt water vapor in mountains to start restoring a water cycle is very, very interesting. But not only that, because if we dredge the soils and pump them up there and let her sit a while to evaporate, after with the aquatic trains we took all the nutrients out, we let the water flow back to the ocean and she regenerates again her own energy.
Okay.
You spread her in growing beds where you grow plants and you later on you pick those livable soils with the plant and that's what you start replanting in the desert. It's not, I have to be careful with by not hurting other people, but I'm not going to spread at all any sediments somewhere because it simply doesn't work. You need to revitalize the sediments and use ecological succession to be able to do it. But if you do it with all natural water produced ourselves, so we're not dependent of rainfall, you generate a very powerful engine. And if you find the right spots, which Mian supported us a lot with, we found the right mountains to start building fog nets, to start building the saltwater treatment settlement areas, have additional evaporation, and from there we're building it. And it looks just, it's hard work, lots of work. Is you bring livable soils with a plant living in there, with the plant you grow for like a year or a couple of trees, that's what you're going to plant. You don't spread. Everybody that tells you that you can dredge marine sediments and you spray it out of the desert, sorry, that's not how it works.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just trying to understand. So you actually grow the plants and then take the whole
you
plant.
You grow the plants, you take them with livable soils, with additional water, and then you can replant it. And if you look at it, here you got, for example, so we're working with a couple of partners. So if you have these big stock areas, this is where you dump your marine sediments. You can connect them with little windmills that don't have a dynamo, but have a hydraulic pump in top. So they create pressure head. You can transport via smaller pipelines your marine sediments to little farm sites where communities on your fog forest areas can start building indigenous forest. And this is how the whole concept works. So you need the people to do it. regreening is not an industrial thing. It's love, it's humans, it's hands you need. You can use an industrial skill to support the people. That's why we normally call it resource-based dredging. But I'm personally, I don't believe in any industrialized way of planting, seeding, or whatever it is. It's people that got to do it. So what we did is we generated a concept via John Todd, which we call the eco-oasis, and you can transform her in many different shapes you want. But in principally, it's the fact that you create mini ecosystems. So you use all the positive feedback loops within a complete ecosystem in the atmosphere, the land, and the aquatic to increase microbial communities, to revitalize the sediments. And that's what you, with livable plants, going to plant on the right spot where they can sequester water vapor from your atmosphere. And these are the basic principles. Now, last but not least, I'm currently just wrapping up the whole flow line, is because many of the people, what we came up with was a complete natural way. So we're producing our own water, the farmers are producing their own water, and that's way how you can start planting. But of course, water then is the limiting factor in a desert. And then I started to meet guys, because the whole concept of what we're trying to do is the Weathermakers is give a new purpose to existing industries. It's the oil industry, it's the dredging industry. Many of the people that are working in these companies don't want to destroy nature. They're just fed into this money-making machine where everybody doesn't give a fuck what they do, but they all want to change. That was myself as well in the dredging company. So what we started to realize is that if we can use existing old industries in a positive way, if we change the purpose, you can do funny things. And then these guys came up to me of a very big Dutch shipping company that had lots of oil tankers, which were making a loss, but they couldn't sell them because too many people were trying to sell these boats. So the financial investors had a big problem. So they came up with a concept inspired by a shaman from Greenland. And he told them, you have to do something with the melting green water, because the melting green water, when it hits the ocean, it causes an ecological disaster. 10 million cubic meters per second. Get it into your head. It's crazy if you think about the number. Why don't we get oil tankers, which do not do a lot now? You can break them down on a Turkish beach and create another ecological disaster. Or you let them sail for a while. And let them sail the melting water, which is better than the Dutch drinking water. Not only that, it's very high on silica. And if you believe some spiritual people around, water has a memory. It's livable water. She was not chemically treated. No, she was freezed. And now she's melting. So what we're currently working on is getting some 15 to 20 crude oil tankers as a concept again. It's not up to me to decide if we want to do it, but we're creating the way. What we can do is have 15 to 20 crude oil tankers of 250 million liters of water sailing there up and down, using an ISPN, so just a floating buoy, where we can use the dredging pipelines, where we can just fill the old natural aquifers, which sometimes still get fed by rainwater, and fill them up with this water. The cool thing about water, it's you cannot really do a lot of corruption with it in that sense, and we can just create strategic drinking water supplies with very high levels of silica, so you can purify her a couple of times, so you can grow lots of diatoms in it. And we just found this amazing accelerator. And it's not at all that costly, and you don't need to build those stupid desalination plants. So there's not really a reason, technically, that we cannot do it. Shitloads of work, hard work. Way better than a war, if you ask me. So it's just a matter of our species, of our principally funny world, what do we want? Because if we want it, we can use this very destructive industry of the oil, of the minings, of the dredging. Man, we can use them to do what they did in the Lisbon.
Hey, I want to just ask you about, I don't know if you've heard of Roger Savory's work. He's been trying to regreen some deserts in Africa and Australia, and the way he does it,
older, right?
Huh?
He's a bit older, right? I think I
He's
heard.
the son of Alan Savory, so he's a bit younger, I think.
No, I don't know. No, I know Alan Savory, but I don't know his son.
So he's trying to create what's called a biological carpet. So they get lots of cow dung, and in the cow dung they eat, a lot of food, and then they have the cows in a certain area in the desert-like area, and then the dung and the urine create this wet, moist environment, and underneath there's some fungi spores in the dung, and so it starts kind of growing and creating. So the dung kind of shields the whole area from the sunlight, the ultraviolet rays, and so it can start building the soil that way, and then they grow the plants. And I was just wondering, how is that approach? How contrasts with yours, or if that approach could also maybe work in your area? Or
yeah, but a bit later on in the time scale. We definitely have. That's what we normally also have. I'm loving the work from Alan Savory, yeah, and don't get me wrong at all. But you got to realize that this Sinai desert is a bit of a different desert than just an arid African landscape. There is no soil anymore here. All of that soil has been flushed away. So here, what you need to do, you really got to start bringing soils. Though on the other hand, on really the low parts of it, so we start with the lagoon, start with the wetlands, then jump into the mountains. But on the lower parts, where there still is sand, there you can really start working, of course, with cattle and start to regreen it from that sense. But I do believe that the degradation of the Sinai is a bit more worse than what Alan Savory, because I don't know the work of his son, and they used to work for him. But I fully agree with him, and I think it's one of my last slides. I normally always say that that's definitely inspired by his thing. Yeah, there you go. I use the animals as well. With other words, I will make it big. What I learned from Alan Savory is that the animal kingdom, like John Todd says in the aquatic part, is there to support you. Don't build a machine that can plow the ground. You use your cattle, principally. Well, up here is, in the beginning, as being an engineer, many of the ecologist people trying to tackle me that we were a little bit crazy and blah, blah, blah. And man, you cannot, geez, you have to realize if you're going to regreen that desert and you pick your plants, you got to manipulate it. Which plants are you going to pick? I thought, I don't know, man. Why don't we think a little bit differently? Why don't we just look? That's what we're currently rolling out Foodie with Mohammed Zakaria. Why don't we look? She's the biggest bird migration route on our planet. All those birds follow the wetlands in their surroundings. So the only thing we need to do, how can we attract the birds again? And the birds will bring the seeds. And the birds, or it's nature that will build, fully inspired by Alan Savory, their own robustness. We don't need to start doing it ourselves. It's sometimes I have to laugh about it, because the way we think we can manipulate ecosystems, it shows us, or it shows me, the lack of understanding we fully have of our natural world.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, get the birds. So if you're building the wetlands and the greenery, then the birds will come kind of, and with their seeds.
Yeah, we're just tracking. We're really now tracking all the what you see here, all the different species, and this is just a rough map, of course. But you have lots of the wetlands where they're approaching in the nearby areas and where they're flying to it. And on those wetlands, we're just making plant lists and trying to figure out, just on a bit of big data exercises, what the selected plants will be to attract them. And when you attract them, they will start building their own robustness. Yeah.
In the desert sand in the Sinai right now, is there any seeds at all, or is there just no seeds there?
Yeah, principally, I've never been there yet. That will now change soon, I guess. But no, in the lowlands you still have, of course, because there's still some vegetation. But the majority, there's no sand. On the lowlands, there's sand, but really going up there, it's barren rock, all flushed away. So no, there will not be that many seeds at all.
Mm-hmm. And then, so I mean, if you're going to cover with soil, the Sinai, I mean, that's a large area, right? So the lake probably doesn't provide enough soil for the whole area. So
yeah, we're not going to cover the desert with a layer of sediments. There's 2.5 billion cubic meters.
Mm-hmm.
It's massive amount of soils we have. It's sufficient to approximately restore. We're just running all of our data-driven models step by step. We know it further. I'm just looking if I can. There's only you don't need to regreen everything. She will start propagating by herself. But it looks like now that we're approximately thinking on 1/3 of that 35,000 square kilometers to regreen.
Mm-hmm.
On the kind of, I'm inspired by tiny forest. I don't know what's the international name of it, but it's actually from
Miyake forest.
Yeah, and what we are looking into is really having a dense plantation of those different plants. But mainly now we're just running the methodologies. And I always got inspired by this podcast of 13 minutes to the moon. Don't get me wrong. When your president at a certain moment said, let's land on the moon, they didn't know up front exactly how they would do every step. We know approximately the way ahead and how we need to do it, but we're going to discover it, of course. So the majority of what we're now doing is developing methodologies on how you can figure out the best way how to do it. This is where Li Rei, the guy from China, from the Lus Plateau, who did the first really parts of the restoration of the Lus Plateau, how we set up methodologies to learn the best way how to do it. So if you ask me, that's normally also the 3 different tracks. I'm pretty sure, I'm fully sure how to do the restoration of the lagoon. I'm fully sure how to revitalize marine sediments and build livable, fresh biosphere of it. We still have to figure out in detail how to fully roll that out on the larger scale.
Right. But I think that the whole the savory idea is that the dung can kind of cover up some of the the desert sand, so it would shield it from the sun. So then maybe in the Sinai,
but where he is normally working, that's real different area than here. If you go here up into the mountains, yeah, let me show you back. There is no desert. Normally, when people this is what you call a desert. This is only a very limited part of the Sinai, and the majority of it is barren rock.
Oh, right. So you need to even
yeah, that's why you need, everything is eroded. That's all the lagoon. You can see it, all the whiteys, the majority of it. There's almost everything is flushed away.
Right.
And only here, that lighter part, that is really what we normally call a desert. What Alan Savory does, with all due respect, it's amazing what he does. Don't get me wrong, but that they work in more easier conditions than this little part. To be quite honest, if you look at me, if you read our perspective paper, which you can find on our website, I'm pretty sure that if we analyze the historical data, this is where the last African human period ended so dramatically. It's the Sinai that fell. So in principle, she is the oldest desert in North Africa.
Cool. And then I think, yeah, okay. So you have like 3 tracks. So you have the kind of the lake redoing, and then the regreening the desert and the hydrological cycle. Okay, cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about the hydrological cycle and how that?
Yeah, the hydrological cycle is what we're currently doing based upon, I don't know if the people know him, but Mian, for me, is also one of my Jedis. But he was the head of the climate research of the European Commission. And you normally summarize his work as water begets water, soil is the womb, the vegetation is the midwife. With other words, it's a bit of a sharp one. Climate change is not that much about carbon dioxide. It's much more about water. Don't get me wrong. It has to do with carbon dioxide. But the biggest driver of it is water. And what he explains, it's the vegetation cover that grows so much quicker if you have proper animal life living there. It's the vegetation cover that naturally manage your water, harvest your water, evaporates your water. And where I actually showed, it's just outside the reach here because it's within Valencia, is that your evaporation on sea is your cloud trigger former, and approximately is 2/3 of the water vapor concentration you need to get rain. And when the water enters from the ocean into your land, in the Mediterranean basin, it's approximately 14 grams when it's 26 degrees. You need an additional 7 grams to let it rain on a mountain range of approximately 2,000 meters high. I just tried to summarize his work, what he did in Valencia.
Yeah, I actually interviewed him on
You reduce that evaporation, you don't reach the 21 grams, and then you get wind going up. And because in Spain you got a large watershed on the Atlantic and on the Mediterranean, the air goes up and being transported to a higher atmospheric layer, where we know that we got this onion. And he lost it. That's what he saw. That's why he predicted all the floodings in Eastern Europe, and everybody called him crazy, but everything happened. Well, the funny thing about the Sinai, the first time I traveled up to him, I had to meet him via John Liu. And he's, first of all, a very funny character. He showed to me, let me see if I got the map. Here it is. So his work was there. You got the continental divide. And very simply said, the continental divide is a mountain range high enough. And by that elevation, you're losing temperature, so you're increasing condensation, so your water droplet starts to fall, so you change weather system. Very simply said. That's what a continental divide means. And he said, dude, you got one on the Sinai. With other words, there used to be, because this map is being based upon 5,000 years old DNA data by the UN, etc., etc. There used to be a continental divide on the Sinai. And normally it says that light blue area, which you see here, so it's the southern parts of Europe and the northern parts of Africa, fully connected here with the Nile River, is that 70 to 80% of the water that evaporates on the Mediterranean falls back into that light blue area, if the water cycles were still functional. But the water cycle got broken, and very quickly, and this is what we showed here, because this became a desert. What happens every day, approximately 70% of the days a year, these kind of winds start. And lots of the meteorological people look at the bad weather systems, but I'm a morphologist. So what we started to do, together with Miamian, understand what he meant. And what Miamian did with his work, he separated low pressure systems coming from the Mediterranean or the Atlantic Sea, and he really isolated his local water cycle events in Valencia. That's what we did here. Up here, they're like approximately 70% of the time. They're sun-driven winds. So if the sun comes up, you get the thermal, you get the thermal flow coming up from the land. The land heats up, so the air heats up, so the air starts to rise. So you create a low pressure just above your land. And that's what's pulling the sea breeze in. A little bit later on the day, your mountain ranges got heated, and that wind is, after the sea breeze, she's being pulled to the mountain ranges. But then I said to Mian, I said, dude, listen, you got this. And again, these elevations are pulled out here, of course, they just show it better. You got here a vacuum breeze. It's exactly the white thing what I showed you on the satellite image. Because if the mountains stop, the air falls down and they accelerate into that Red Sea. And you get a very negative vacuum cleaner effect of that Sinai. Of course, I was sometimes thinking like, dude, am I still sharp? Am I not getting crazy? So a friend of mine said, geez, we're engineers. So there you get the Sinai, and there you get the wind speed in the Red Sea. So he said, if you're right, And I drew this map. Normally I have, this is a little bit nicer drawing, but normally I have the sketches. What I said is that Sinai, due to her triangle shape and her mountain things, is a vacuum cleaner. She pulls lots of water vapor from the Mediterranean, goes over the mountain, it falls into the Red Sea and creates a large pressure area. So in the summer, you could completely see that wind because it's that vacuum cleaner that blows through the Red Sea, that wind out. But in the winter, it's approximately 10 to 15 degrees cooler. And those drawings you see are monthly averaged winds. And there indeed, you get the Indian Ocean pressure already coming, because that has to do with the Coriolis effect. And because I knew that looking at the rotation of the Earth, that the water vapor would come back. It's the Coriolis effect. In the right seasons, it's the pressure of the Indian Ocean. And you can just look at the sailing routes, man. You can look at the wineries. That's what I learned from Lee Ray. Holistically look at your history and it will tell you so much. So what we discovered is if you flip the wind by restoring the wetlands, by getting that 14 gram Mian told you about, restoring that vegetation cover, increasing the 14 grams to 21 grams, and what happens then? You reach your cloud condensation level within your mountain range. But if you reach your cloud condensation level, your air implodes. So you start pulling sea breeze or thick, moist air from the sea on a higher level. And then your droplets form. But by condensating, she heats up her surrounding air, and those clouds, like cauliflowers, start to exist. Till the moment your droplet gets big enough that gravity will win it from your thermal rise. And you flip your winds. And if you flip your winds, you stop the pressure. And then if you look at the Coriolis effect, you know that the Indian Ocean pressure, like I showed you there on the right side, comes back.
Can you say a little bit, repeat the logic on why the wind flips direction?
So if there's no condensation level happening, because there's no adding of moisture, and there's no adding of moisture because there's no vegetation cover, what happens is you create a low pressure on your land and your wind is just accelerating. Because you got a low pressure, she goes up and then she falls down. So she's really like a negative breeze. And this is air very close to your land surface. Now, if you recover this ecosystem, you don't need to recover it all, parts of it. What happens is because there's vegetation cover, there's water. So if the sun goes up, first your water starts to evaporate. So your temperatures remain much cooler, approximately 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So there's less thermal flow. So if there's less low pressure, there's less wind coming. So the wind is slower and you're adding water vapor because you're evaporating moisture to reduce your temperature. So your water vapor concentration quickly rises up to the 21 grams. Well, if she hits 21 grams, all rule of thumbs, on 2000 meter, you hit, just look at your atmospheric graphs, your condensation level. Now, what happens if you hit 100% relative humidity because your air is rising, she's cooling down. So you're hitting your relative humidity, you condensate. But if water vapor condensates to liquid, your air implodes. So then she starts pulling a breeze on 2000 level or a higher atmospheric level from the ocean. So there's no very strong wind close to your land, but it's a much smaller, gentle wind. And then she condensates. But if water condensates, she heats up the air around her. So the droplet starts rising. And then she cycles again till she comes bigger and bigger. And when she's big enough, gravity, the acceleration of gravity will win it from your thermal rise. She falls down. But what happens if a droplet falls down? You create a drag force. You flip the fucking wind.
Are you saying you're dragging in?
Are you a sailor? Are you a sailor? Google it. You have this amazing 8 years ago, I guess, you had the women boat for the first time sailing the Volvo Ocean Race in the doldrums. And they completely smashed all the 7 boats of the men. Why? There's a beautiful interview with that captain. Because this is how cloud works. If a cloud still is building up, she sucks winds. But if she starts raining, she blows winds. Feel it. Go for yourself into a shower and you will notice.
Yeah, I've heard of people getting sucked up into winds, like paragliding and stuff.
Yeah.
So are you saying that when the cloud condenses,
I'm not saying that. It's not me saying. This is just natural physics.
Right. I'm asking, is the wind being sucked from the Red Sea? So you're drawing in wind
No.
from the Red Sea?
No. Here you get the cycle. Now what happens is you've got, in an ecosystem, you have different scales of it. And I don't know if you know the Coriolis effect, but due to the rotation of the Earth, your mass will flow to a certain way. That's why in the northern atmosphere, your sink drains in a different direction than in the southern one. So what we knew is if this wind is gone, if that wind, which is being pulled, the vacuum cleaner from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea, if that pressure is gone, the data is telling you, there you get the pressure of the Indian Ocean coming. So in the right season, she will just push further if this wind is gone. This wind is coming from your vacuum cleaner of your things. So if you're restoring your water cycle, your pressure away is gone in the Red Sea and all of that moisture will come. That's why we have lots of pollens in Constantinople, Athens, and other things. Where we know they're all biodiversity from the Indian Ocean, but we don't know where to go. I can tell you further. One of my favorite islands is Corsica. But there are many of these islands in the Mediterranean. Go to the southeast side of all of these islands, and they all have the Levant terrassen. So the first time I was there, like, what the fuck, Levant terrassen? Why Levant? Oh, because it's known that in the winter, the winds from the Levant, the tectonic plate Levant, which the Sinai is part of, would bring the rain. We know it. It's written all of our history. That's what it does. You completely flip a regional weather system. I was reading Tim Flannery, the book, The Weathermakers, on page 66. That it was in Mesopotamia, that it was Babylon that fell. And everybody was surprised with it. And why did it fall? Because all of a sudden, it was the sun flood. And I'm an engineer. Huh? I'm not at all a scientist. But I was looking, if the system used to be this, and the system flipped to this, you flip the complete wind here. So by building up this pressure, the pressure of the Indian Ocean cannot go into there anymore, and she flipped into Mesopotamia. Sun flood. It's the clouds. It's water vapor.
Is it the biotic pump you're talking about, that effect?
Yeah, but the biotic pump is Miamian is different than the biotic pump. They're similar, but Miamian describes a destroyed system. A biotic pump describes a functional system. But in principle, it's the same, because the biotic pump says that if you evaporate moisture, which implodes, she pulls the breeze into her. That's why we call it a rainforest. There are different phases of that system.
Okay, so Miamian is saying that you need
this is the energetic way how air flows. This is a larger scale than a biotic pump. This is your Earth system scale.
So okay, so let me just try to figure out. So Milan is saying that you need the evapotranspiration to add to the incoming ocean water vapor to create enough water vapor to create a cloud and create rain, and then also that evapotranspiration is cooling the air above the Sinai, right? Or so it's not quite so hot. So that cooling effect also affects the wind, and then
Yeah, but the wind, but two things. Miamian says more than only what we just said, because Miamian was predicting. Let me just get a map. Here, there you got the continental divide. So you got a mountain range, which is the highest there. In Spain, it's your backbone. One side it flows to the Mediterranean, one side it flows to the Atlantic. What Miamian saw was that those stupid Europeans were drying their swamps. And because they were drying the swamps, they were completely destroying the evaporation required to reach your cloud levels on your continental divide. And when they were stopping it, they didn't reach the 21 gram, but for example, reached the 19. And with it, it was drier, so the wind speed, due to the increase of temperature, was accelerating, and they bounced into each other, and the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, and they were transported to a higher level. And there the water accumulated on a level of 3 to 5 kilometers, where she's out of reach of your biosphere, so where she can normally generate. That's why in Spain you have all of these higher clouds. And what he figured out was that the water was accumulating for 5 days, and then was picked up by a low pressure system coming from England, just up north, the Pyrenees. The low pressure systems can break through the atmospheric layering, pick up the moist, and they would drop it in Eastern Europe to completely create floods. That was what Miamian was saying. The 5B-shaped water transportation, what caused desertification in Spain and caused floodings in Eastern Africa. And when I came up to his place, I said, and the weird thing is we have very similar sketches. I was actually saying, listen, up in the Sinai, I don't have two very big watersheds, your Atlantic and your Mediterranean, that build up kinetic energy, that bounce to each other and transport it to a higher level. But I have a relatively large one, the northern one, and a very short south one. So that south one can never build up enough pressure to push it to a higher level, but she gets overrun by the northern parts. So we have a much more water vapor distribution problem, and not to a vertical level, but to a horizontal, different encatchment basins. And that's what's happening at our place. So we're restoring an encatchment basin. So the water is not in the right seasons losing anymore to the Red Sea. No, she's flowing back into the Nile Valley. So the reduction of your water vapor that causes all of these bad weather effects is now injected again in Northern Africa, so where she can start increasing water vapor and step by step stop their situation.
Wait, are you saying you're going to lessen the amount of hurricanes by what you're doing in the Sinai?
As an engineer, I'm 100% saying that.
Wow. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of ripple effects. So basically, by regreening the Sinai, you're also going to bring back rain, and you're going to change the wind patterns, and potentially also lessen the amount of hurricanes in other parts of the world.
Again, let me say this, because I always have to be careful if you say it like this. I cannot. The ripple effects, the potential ripple effects, are massive, because that's what, as I was discussing with Lee Ray, you can also explain why Northern Africa or Northern China is there getting desertified. But we don't know. The only thing we know is how it used to be. We know we can restore that Sinai technically. So we know we're going to cause massive ripple effects. What exactly they will be, I cannot say. But the narrative is so strong that now already after 6 years, we got a whole independent group of PhDers working on the topic. Nobody can tackle it. We cannot prove it. But after 6 years, nobody can say it's not true. So it's so big that we don't have any computer models being able to model this. Of course, we have global models, but they're more climate models and not attached to weather. And here what we do is we're sucking in two different scales of numerical models. So what we're doing is, what we do know, and we just now signed a cooperation agreement with the Egyptian government to hopefully start dredging now within June. Is what we know, the moment we start restoring the wetlands, we will see a change in water vapor distribution over the Sinai. So the good thing is, and that's what we learned from the Lus Plateau, that's what we learned from all the permaculture people. You learn by doing. Start with it, measuring it, do it. But it does give a full global potential solution. Not that by fixing the Sinai you fix everything, but by fixing the Sinai you create an opportunity to regreen all Northern Africa, Middle East, and Northern China. And that's what we normally, or that's what the message of the Weathermakers always has been. If we focus on the Sinai to bring together our destructive industries to restore this ecosystem, we create light in the tunnel. Because I believe, as an engineer, that this is the way forward to fix climate change. Yes, we have to do something about pollution. Yes, we have to do something about smart ways of sustainable energy. But ecological, planetary restoration has to be by far number one on anything what we're going to do in the nearby future to survive as a species.
Mm. So when you regreen, when you get more rains in the Sinai, does that water vapor also then spread eastward to the Middle East, like Israel, Jordan, and then up into Asia, like some of that water vapor, and create more rain there?
Not the cycle stops. How can I easily say it? If it's a desert, she pulls a lot of moisture out of that Mediterranean. If you regreen her, you stop the loss of that water out of the Mediterranean and catchment basin. Due to the fact you start to regreen the Sinai, you cool off that local temperatures. So the increase of moist will create an edge where you will start increasing more water vapor. So yes, if you regreen the Sinai, you will get more rain in Israel, Lebanon, and the eastern parts of Egypt. And then if you have more rain there, you can regreen that more, and then your edge is shifting up to your side. And yes, then you can start thinking of the whole of North Africa and the Middle East. But this is not weird, because this is how we know that the whole system became a desert anyway. Like Xavier Rudd used to say, we have seen this all before. Man, the desert, I don't know if you know, I figured it out later on. You can read that in our perspective paper on site. She became a desert many, many times, and regreened many, many times.
So what caused it to become a desert the last time? It was when was this? You're saying a time of Jesus, or like 4,000 years ago or something?
The last time. So now what you have is normally, but that's what we write in our perspective paper, where you're very much challenging the current reasoning where they say that the Sahara becomes a desert or becomes green again. And normally they say it's the precession of the axis of the Earth, right? Because she shifts every 22,000 or 25,000 years. You know it,
right? Yeah, yeah.
And that causes a climatological change. The last African human period, which was approximately ending somewhere 4,000 or 3,000 years before Christ, ended very rapidly in 100 to 200 years. And if I'm, as an engineer, just looking at the data, I can tell you that's not. Yes, the precession has a very profound impact on those climatological changes, but it's not the main driven reason why that ended. It's human destruction. And that's what many other researchers are now saying as well, that could it be, because that's what we're saying as well with the Sinai. We know that the Levant started to chop down the forest for hunting grounds, and using the forest as a fuel to start deforestating it. And we know there used to be a forest, I think 125,000 years before Christ. And then step by step, the society started to grow, and we started the savannas to overgraze, And when we started to overgraze, the whole system collapsed. Now, what we're saying is, could it be that if that Sinai has such a profound impact on the climate, could it be that there's not a polarization in the discussion? Oh no, but parts of the Sahara are naturally desertified and parts are human-induced climate change. Could it be that human-induced climate change has a much bigger impact than ever thought of if you simply look at the weather system? And that's the pitch. I'm not going to say here that everything I say is true, because it's so big, it's almost too big to grasp. But what we're saying is, could there be a complete different narrative behind climate change in the history of our planet? Because if you then start thinking of what ecological function does to water vapor distribution, you can see a complete different pattern occurring in history than currently the very shallow narrative that the industrialization caused climate change, which is bullshit. It didn't. The desert was there. Why was the desert there? Because we destroyed an ecosystem. It helped us because when the desert came there, we're heating up the planet and we pushed away in ice time. But now we're living on the fucking edge. So now we're going to do exactly the other way around. And we can do it. It's not difficult. The question is, do we want to? And the other question is, can we work together?
Right. Well, there are climatologists and hydroclimatologists now beginning to see the connection between, climate patterns and the vegetation and land use. And I'm wondering, is there some, and some of them run these global climate models. Are you able
scientists never find a solution. Scientists optimize.
Right. I was just wondering whether, you could plug in, if you regreen some of this Sinai into their global climate models. And
but what I told you, we have a full, but first of all, the current models are bullshit. They're not good. You got good weather models, the WRF models, we use them as well. And you got the good global climate models, but they're not fitting in good at the moment at all. I've got a full independent wet service. We got a full team working on that. But you see the struggles of science. Science cannot, if you feed computer models which data out of a negative cycle going down, they cannot predict the system how she will turn up if you change her. That's the problem with the current data. That's why I don't really believe in EA or IA, artificial intelligence, in that sense. Because you're always feeding her with data, and then she's very good at finding a problem. That's science or a solution. But you need to be creative to see the different changes. Like 35 years after they started to regreen the Lust Plateau, they now say, no, we see a little bit of rain, more. Come on. I've been there, speak to the local people. It's raining there way more. But science is afraid. We created a kind of scientific monster, which never sees the solution as strong as she is and never see the problem as bad as she is. Because we're talking about carbon dioxide. Everybody that really thinks a Tesla has anything to do with the solution for climate change, come on. It's a beautiful car, don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing the brand here, but nothing has to do. We're walking a dead end. We're focusing on carbon where water is by far the most worst greenhouse gas, much further than methane. It was Mihamian explaining that water vapor on 3 kilometers height is 47 times more worse than carbon dioxide, twice as much as methane. So why the hell are we not restoring water cycles ASAP? Because the cool thing is, you create water, you create food, you create biodiversity, you create stable climates. And what? If it all doesn't turn to work out, if something we're good at in species, chopping down forests. So if it all would be false, you still have resources. So it's crazy why we don't do it. It's crazy that our Dutch government, our prime minister says, no, we're going to pump carbon dioxide in an empty gas field. Come on. Which lobby are you listening to? Wake the hell up. And that's a little bit, and I'm not blaming at all any scientist, but I'm blaming the system we created, where we're just walking a dead end. IPCC does beautiful work, but we're way worse than they're predicting. And they're already predicting that we're doing bad. And what are we going to do? We're going to build solar panels, windmills from which materials? We don't have it. We know it. Ecological, planetary regeneration. It's a pretty cool path.
Cool. And how far are you along with the Egyptian government and in this project? Where is it right now? What's the timeline?
First deal signed on the COP. So we signed now, after 6 years, a PPP together with Suez Canal. But the prime minister were there, six ministers were there. So we're now, they already start dredging, but they're having some problems. So we're just wrapping up the whole work, and I will travel up there in December, start doing the first workshops, supporting them on the work they're now doing, start to monitoring with them, and hopefully somewhere in June 2023 we'll start dredging the early works together with them, and starting to build the pilot for the regreening of the desert. And it's a 30-year plan. So I can finally say after 6 years coming up with this funny idea, that we can now really start doing it. And we are talking with the Dutch government, with the French, with the Spanish, with the Belgium, all to financially really start supporting this project, because sadly Egypt is very much hit by the war in the Ukraine due to the food. So I'm happy to say that Europe really wants to support it. And don't get me wrong, it's also the good for Europe. Less refugees, more work for their industries, and more potential for green hydrogen. And it's so much needed for Egypt because they're in such a vulnerable position with their rapid growing population and their instability of the region.
Mm. Cool. Well, this is a truly amazing project, very ambitious, and it kind of it pulls together so many different things, right? From soil science to lake wetland science to meteorology, hydroclimatology.
Again, many of those people came to us, so I have to be humble to all the people that supported it. But that's absolutely true. Yeah, it's appealing. It's appealing narrative.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking your time out to describe this project, and all the best. I really hope this. This is quite an amazing project with so many ripple effects.
You can find quite a lot of stuff on our website. All what we do will be for everybody. Everybody can start using it from the moment we're there to share it. So you can Google it. Go to the weathermakers.nl, and otherwise we will we'll keep you updated with the progress we make.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Okay, ciao.
Be well. Cheers.